You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Welcome to Unbiased Science,
where we bring scientific method to the madness.
We're your hosts, Dr. Steier
and Dr. Sarah Scheinman.
And today we are talking about a topic that impacts millions upon millions of people around the globe, diabetes. And we have a very special guest. We're going to jump right in here. Dr. Sam Scott, who has kindly given us clearance and actually asked that we call him Sam. So we'll be calling him Sam throughout the episode. And let me tell you a little bit about Sam. So Sam Scott holds a PhD in exercise physiology and has clinical and applied research experience in diabetes, obesity, and continuous glucose monitoring technology, which we are going to talk about. His primary research focus has been on developing strategies to overcome the major barriers to exercise for people living with diabetes. For over 5 years, Sam was the head of research for Team Novo Nordisk, the professional cycling team consisting of athletes living with type 1 diabetes. His research has resulted in a strong academic output. We're going to link to all this stuff in our show notes, with over 30 publications and high impact journals. Sam is currently CEO of Enhanced, a medtech startup that aims to create a glucose and exercise management platform for people living with diabetes. All right, Sam, thank you so much for joining us today. It's clear that you will have a lot to say about this topic, and I know I'm going to learn a lot from you. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks a lot for having me. It's great to be here.
And I have to say, so one of our team members, Alex St. John, he does a lot of work in this space as well. And when I told him that you were coming on the pod, he totally freaked out. And he was like, oh my gosh, I cite Sam's research all the time. And you can follow his page at St. John Science, and we could link to that as well. So lots of fans on the team of your work. So Sam made us aware just before we started recording of this amazing resource that we will definitely link to. It's called diabetesatlas.org, and it summarizes some of the key global findings on the topic of diabetes. So I'll just highlight some of these. I think this provides some really great context for why we're talking about this topic. So currently there are over 500 million with a B, so 537 million adults are living with diabetes. This is around the globe. 3 in 4 adults with diabetes live in low and middle income countries. And there are 6.7 million deaths due to diabetes, and that was just in 2021 alone. This is a fantastic resource, Sam. Thanks for letting us know about it. You can look by continent, by country. It really breaks out the statistics in a way that's quite impactful. But I didn't realize that this many people were impacted by diabetes. And of course, when we say diabetes, there are different types of diabetes. So really hoping that you can set the stage. Maybe we can kick things off with some definitions, some clarifications about what it is we're talking about. Sarah, I know you appreciate that.
You all know I love a definition at this point. Maybe I can start us off by giving just a broad 1,000-foot overview of, what are we talking about when we say diabetes, right? So diabetes is a disease in which sugar levels are above normal in the blood. So whenever we eat anything, our body converts our food into sugar, which is then converted and used by our cells as energy to fuel all of the different biological processes that make us us. We have this little organ in our body called the pancreas. And the pancreas makes a hormone that's called insulin, which basically all that does is it helps the glucose or the sugar get into the cells of our body so it can do the work and drive all the different physiological processes. But when you have diabetes, your body either doesn't make enough insulin, doesn't make any insulin, or it can't use its own insulin as well as it should be. And this causes glucose or the sugars to build up in the blood. And then over time, these high levels of sugar in the blood can cause serious health problems. For example, heart disease, blindness in certain cases, kidney failure, and sometimes foot sores, and even in the most severe cases, amputations. So there are actually a couple different types of diabetes, and I think maybe this would be a good place to start, Sam. Can you talk to us about the different types of diabetes? Specifically, I know there's type 1 diabetes, there's type 2 diabetes. I think there are a few more types, but can you just comment on that, please?
Yeah, those statistics are huge, as you say, and it's kind of covering that umbrella term. The most common types is type 1, type 2. There's also gestational. So gestational is where people will experience higher blood glucose than normal during pregnancy. It tends to kind of disappear afterwards, but it places both the child and the mother at greater risk afterwards. So type 1 diabetes, this is an autoimmune condition. This is where, for some as yet unknown reason, the body's immune system decides to attack those beta cells within the pancreas. It happens very quickly, meaning that the body no longer produces this important hormone, is no longer able to regulate glucose, and then the person is reliant on administering insulin and monitoring their glucose levels for the rest of their life. The other type 2 diabetes, which is the most common type, this is a chronic condition. It tends to develop over longer term. It starts where the body stops responding so much to the glucose. You start producing more insulin. You're becoming more insulin resistant. Gradually over time, it will develop into full-blown type 2 diabetes, whereby you might need to start using insulin as well. The main focus of my work has been around type 1 diabetes. You mentioned all of these statistics. This is kind of on a really global level. Another important thing, I think, is just the impact on the individual living with it. Another thing, if we're talking statistics, there's an estimated over 200 additional decisions that somebody living with type 1 diabetes will have to make every day. And this is about things such as the impact of food, insulin dosing, exercise, a whole range of different things that you have to kind of manage throughout the day as you look to safely maintain and manage safe glucose levels.
And Sam, there's also something that we hear about sometimes that's called pre-diabetes. What is this?
So pre-diabetes, this is at the point at which you are at a much greater risk of developing into type 2 diabetes. So this is defined as having higher blood glucose concentration. The different cutoffs will depend on which kind of country you are living in. It's usually kind of diagnosed using something called an oral glucose tolerance test, which is a test where you will have regular blood tests taken after having consumed a very sugary drink, basically looking at how your body copes with that high sugar intake. The other thing on top of these things is, you mentioned there, Jess, around the high number of people with diabetes. There's also 500 million people with pre-diabetes worldwide. So these are people who are at risk of moving into having full-blown type 2 diabetes. So over 1 billion people.
So Sam, what really strikes me as you're talking, and even in some of the emails that we've exchanged, is you're very compassionate and empathetic when it comes to, helping people who are dealing with this. Because when I see so much content on social media where there's a lot of shame and blame around diabetes, this idea that people are, causing it themselves and bringing it on themselves. And, my understanding is that it's really a combination of risk factors, some of which are out of our control. There are genetic components to this, of course. And yes, there are some lifestyle factors that can contribute to someone's risk. So can you maybe just talk a little bit about risk for diabetes? And then I'd love to hear a little bit more about some of the management techniques that you emphasize.
If we talk about kind of type 2 diabetes, so no diabetes, I would say, is the fault of the person who is living with the condition. It's definitely not that way. If we're speaking about type 2 diabetes, pre-diabetes, there can be a misconception that the person living with this has kind of brought it on themselves. But the reality is that modern society really places so many people at great risk, whether it's down to the food that's available, also the lifestyle that is oftentimes kind of imposed by long working hours, long time sitting down. It's very, very difficult to fit exercise, to fit a healthy lifestyle into modern day living. We're also seeing this in developing countries whereby the growth of type 2 diabetes in particular is really, really rapid. And part of the reason here is as we see a big shift from more active work into more sedentary types of work. So we're seeing increasing levels of office jobs. We're also seeing like an infiltration of processed foods, high sugar foods, this type of things. And I myself, being somebody who's very conscious of all of these things, the importance of exercise, the importance of regular kind of movement and limiting high sugar foods in my diet, sometimes find it really difficult to fit regular exercise in. It's also expensive to do this oftentimes after you've finished doing school. You realize when you're at school how privileged you are to kind of have exercise and things kind of thrust on you. But when you're working, you often have to pay to do these things. This is why a large focus of what I've been doing is looking at ways to make it easier for people to incorporate exercise into people's lifestyle. The other major kind of diabetes is type 1 diabetes. This is an autoimmune condition. This is clearly something that develops just due to some as yet kind of unknown reason, whether it's sort of an increased genetic risk or something that's in the environment. And my motivation to being involved in this type of research is really, I think, trying to have some kind of impact that I can in terms of helping people living with this condition. It's important to say as well, type 1 diabetes is my main area of focus, but I do not live with type 1 diabetes myself. Mm-hmm. The main motivator that I have to work in this area is largely down to many people that I've met, friendships of people that I've made from working in this area.
Yeah, that's, I think, right, like I study Alzheimer's disease, but I don't have Alzheimer's disease myself. But I know it's very rare for me to come across someone that I speak to about my research that doesn't know at least one person that's close to them that's been impacted by the disease. So I can absolutely relate to that. And Sam, so you mentioned exercise, and I just wanted to ask you, like, what is it about exercise in particular that's so important for people living with diabetes? Because, there's so many different interventions that you hear about with regards to diabetes. Like, there's certain diets that you hear about, but I'm given to believe that, like, there's something about exercise that is particularly really, really beneficial for people living with diabetes. So, like, why is that?
Yeah, it's really, really important. Again, we kind of have to split with type 1 and type 2 diabetes, like kind of on a broad level. There's also, it's important to kind of distinguish between physical activity and exercise. So exercise is a very kind of structured activity. This tends to include like sports. It's something that usually has a clear beginning and an end. It has kind of an objective. So an example might be going to the gym and doing resistance training, or it might be playing a certain sport. The other thing is physical activity. So this is more kind of the movement that you do throughout the day. This can include walking or this kind of thing. So both of these things are important because you can have people who do exercise every day. So they might go for a run or go for to the gym, but they might spend the rest of their day in an office chair. And if you have high levels of physical inactivity, this can be also kind of an independent risk, separate, despite the fact that you're doing exercise there. The reason it's so important is it has so many benefits for cardiovascular health. So it improves the function and health of your heart, your lungs, your ability to fuel your body, the strength of your heart. It lowers the risk of cardiovascular disease. From a diabetes specific point of view, if we're looking at like glucose metabolism, it also improves insulin sensitivity, so your ability to use glucose. So for people who are at a greater risk of developing type 2 diabetes or even have type 2 diabetes, it can be very important to kind of reduce the risk or also help with managing things like your weight, your health in general. Type 1 diabetes, exercise is really, really important as well. For the reasons that I said before, it's really important to have a really strong heart and lungs and have a high aerobic capacity. This is important for living a long and healthy life. It's also important for blood glucose management. The reason being is that we mentioned that hormone insulin. This is important for managing your blood glucose, but muscle contractions, so this is what happens when you exercise, your muscles contract. This is also an important stimulus for bringing glucose into the muscles. So basically doing exercise can reduce the amount of insulin that's used, and it can help with overall kind of insulin sensitivity and glucose management.
Now, does the type or like the intensity level of the exercise matter, right? Because like there are different types of exercise that you mentioned, right? There's like cardiovascular training, there's resistance training. Does that kind of matter or play into account?
Yeah, so kind of on a very broad level, again, not going specifically into type 1 or type 2 diabetes, but you want to make sure that you're doing enough aerobic exercise, because this is important for the health, the strength of your heart, your lungs. This is why, for example, in the US, the American Diabetes Association recommends as a minimum that people do aerobic exercise 3 times per week. So you're aiming for around 150 minutes per week of moderate intensity aerobic exercise. Resistance training is also important, some kind of training that improves the strength of your muscles. This is important because as we age, after around the age of 30, we will lose muscle mass and quality. So this is important as something that it improves the quality of your muscle, both for maintaining a high level of insulin sensitivity, because the more muscle mass you have, the more insulin sensitive you will be, but also reducing things like risk of falls, which is very important as we age. Another kind of important type of exercise that you might want to incorporate is some kind of balance type work or flexibility, especially as people get older. This is, again, really important because of risk of falls, that type of thing.
All right. So I have a million questions. The first one I want to ask, I think it's really interesting, reading your bio, hearing about your background, that you're working with athletes who have diabetes. For me, I think it challenges a lot of the preconceived notions and stigma. Like when people think about a person with diabetes, I feel like most aren't picturing an athlete. So can you just tell us a little bit about what that experience is like working with athletes?
Yeah, sure. So probably 90% of my focus is on type 1 diabetes. So there's really been, when I was doing a lot of focus on academia, is still a large focus of what I do. But in particular, I had sort of 2 components. One was working on ways to help people manage their glucose during exercise. And by this, I mean doing clinical-based studies that were looking to work towards building up strategies that could be implemented in clinical practice. And these were largely working with people who are sort of doing a normal level of exercise, if you like. So sort of getting into exercise, perhaps wanting to play sport regularly or go to the gym, something like that, but not at a really high level. From my experience there, it can be extremely challenging to manage blood glucose during exercise, but it's definitely possible to compete and do a really high level of exercise. I've worked with athletes from on a very wide range of sports. This includes like professional cycling, sports such as rugby, football, pretty much every sport that you can think of. There's somebody who has managed to really reach the top of that now, living with type 1 diabetes. It doesn't mean that it's not extremely difficult, but it means that it is possible. So there are kind of strategies and solutions. So there's quite a lot of different components related to this.
Okay, next question. So there's a clear need for people with diabetes to monitor their glucose levels, right? But there's a very popular trend, what's called a biohacking trend. And we've talked about it quite a bit on Unbiased Science. And this is where people who do not have diabetes wear continuous glucose monitors in an attempt to biohack their health and, change their behaviors and their diets. Unbiased Science has been, I wouldn't say outspoken, but we've come out to say that there is a point, I approach this as a public health person, as a data scientist, where are we collecting too much data? Yeah. Because if you're looking, you're going to find something. It could lead to anxiety. Do we necessarily, are we finding things that have clinical significance that should be changing our behaviors? Like, I don't know. Like, if we're looking, then we're going to be, okay, what is my level at? And there are going to be normal fluctuations, right, throughout the day and based on our diet. So I'm curious what you think about this trend. Is it a good idea? Is it a bad idea? What are your thoughts?
I think this is a really interesting topic. I think there's lots of kind of components to it. One thing we kind of spoke off air briefly beforehand, I would say that this movement towards this type of technology and also the access to it is sort of an inevitable thing. There's lots of companies that are now working in this area. So continuous glucose monitoring basically started as a technology exclusively for people living with diabetes, first and foremost with type 1 diabetes. The reason being is that if you have type 1 diabetes, it's really essential that you're having an understanding of what your blood glucose is and monitoring this in a way that you can make behavioral changes to live kind of a healthy and safe life. So you're wanting to understand what the impact of a meal that you have is, what stress or exercise. And so from this, you can make decisions about whether you need to adjust your insulin or whether you need to consume some carbohydrates to pull your glucose up. The reason that this technology, the continuous glucose monitoring, developed for this group is because prior to this, the way to measure this was by basically pricking your finger multiple times a day, which is really painful. So the CGM is a great technology in that it allows you to not only need to do this, which is really kind of painful and an unpleasant thing to have to do sort of 10 plus times every single day, but it allows you to see trends in your glucose, which means that you can see the direction that your glucose is going. You can see, and this allows you to anticipate this and make the behavior changes beforehand. It also allows you to have alarms, and this is really important for overnight because one of the biggest challenges around type 1 diabetes and fears is low blood glucose overnight. And then the other thing is being able to look at your data retrospectively, either alone or with a healthcare professional, so you can kind of manage different strategies such as your insulin dosing, your nutrition, other lifestyle factors around this. So CGM has had a huge impact in terms of like lowering the risk for this and this kind of thing. The use of this tech in other groups, I think, as I say, it's kind of an inevitability. And the reason I say that is that lots of companies are seeing this as a huge kind of opportunity to expand the reach of this. I think that the importance around this is contextualizing the information. And if this technology is available before there's information on how to safely understand and use it, then it creates problems. So if you're living with diabetes, you're very well kind of versed in what glucose means for your lifestyle. You understand the different units. You understand that the behaviors that you make have a potentially life-changing kind of impact on your health because you have to manage your safe glucose. If you introduce this type of technology to users that don't have kind of the context or the education behind it, it leads to people having to sort of self-educate from kind of dodgy bits of information from the internet, or that you're kind of having information thrust upon you from people that don't have the information. Something that, as you say, is that having the reference values for what is normal glucose is just kind of lacking. Some of this technology has been pushed out before we really know what normal glucose is, what we know, what you should expect to see if you're not living with diabetes. However, that being said, I think that in the right situation, if you had the right context, it could be useful. For example, we mentioned there 500 million people living with pre-diabetes. These are people who have a higher risk of developing type 2 diabetes, and there's simple behavioral changes that may be introduced in the right way to greatly reduce the risk of this happening. And you could kind of implement different changes that would help with this. But I think the context, the education, that's important.
So I think you just touched on so many important things. First and foremost, I agree the tech is outpacing the education for folks who do not have diabetes, right? And then the other thing is, the thing that gives me the ick about CGMs for people who don't have diabetes is that it feels like at this point in time very grifty, right? It's like people trying to sell you a product or sell you some sort of way to hack your health. And I agree with everything you're saying. I think it could be quite powerful. At this point in time, I don't think that people, the general public, has enough baseline education and knowledge about what those levels mean, right? And as you keep saying, the context. It's sort of how I feel similarly about the full body scans, full body MRIs.
I was about to say that and also like 23andMe and the like the at-home genetic tests too. It's like people are
right.
just because you can access all of this information about your health doesn't mean it's actually going to be beneficial.
Well, and I think about things like health anxiety. I mean, I know that there are people who, they want to know everything about their body,
right.
And it's this pursuit of health and longevity, and I really do understand that. But I always say, if you're looking, you'll will find something.
Right.
And there really are two schools of thoughts on this, and I will say there are people I respect who sort of sit in both camps. Like there's we had Dr. Joe Zundel. He's very outspoken in support of these full body scans, even for folks who don't, have an order from their clinician for this, a specific need that triggers it. Whereas Dr. David Robert Grimes sort of sits on the other side of things, and he's like, well, if you look, you're going to find, and it will cause anxiety. There could be false positives. It could lead to a lot of unnecessary tests and expenses and all this.
And we're living in the information age, right? Like there's all of this information. I mean, like we wear these devices on our as a ring on our finger or a watch on our wrist, and I mean we have all of this data continuously about like our internal physiological state, and it's like if you already have anxiety about your health, like this is only going to compound that.
Right. I mean, to make the point of why the data could be useful, I'm sure that it will help at least some people, right? Like that MRI scan, it probably will detect, it definitely will detect, right? Something in a person who maybe isn't old enough, it hasn't gone for preventative screening because it isn't warranted yet based on age. But then think about how many other people, are getting it that don't need it, and the costs and how it will trigger additional tests. So I could argue both sides. Sure. Anyway, it's just a really interesting topic and concept. So thanks, Sam, for weighing in on that. Sarah, where are we going next with the conversation? Steer the ship here.
Well, I think maybe we can kind of finish things off, Sam, by you telling us a little bit about your company, Enhanced. I mean, I love the idea that it's sort of focused on practical ways of managing diabetes. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
So what we're trying to do is, this stems from the experience of my team and I, where we've worked in kind of clinical research, as I said, collecting data, really looking to develop strategies to help people living with type 1 diabetes to exercise safely, effectively, also help with the motivational aspect around that, and also the data overload. So there's two aspects to that. One is the side of the person living with diabetes, and the other side is the clinician. So the problem that we were seeing is that when you're managing your glucose around exercise, as somebody living with type 1 diabetes, increasingly people having access to these technologies, glucose monitors, but there's no information on how to take action around that. None of the information is contextualized, and it's very difficult to recognize different patterns and know how to respond. So what we wanted to do was simplify the way that data from glucose monitors can be aligned with exercise wearables, your insulin devices. So if you're using an insulin pump or you're using a smart insulin pen, and also nutrition data, so that people can see their data and better recognize how to exercise during sessions. So, for example, what would happen previously was that if you went and saw your healthcare professional, they would have access to your glucose monitoring data that you did. You would talk about that, but there would be no context around it. The only way to have a conversation around how exercise was impacting your glucose would be to rely on memory, or if you had written down like a diary or something. So you had to, from that was the only kind of thing. With our app, what you can do is easily see how different types of exercise are impacting your glucose. So whether it's resistance training, yoga, cycling, whatever, and then you can be kind of guided on how to exercise safely from that. Another key component of this is the sort of social element. So type 1 diabetes is a condition where quite often people feel very alone with this, and it's difficult to find the resources, and it's difficult to find other people who are living with the condition. So we want to have a place where type 1 diabetes specific communities can be brought together through exercise, and also the right resources connected with exercise can be put in one place. So this can be more of a kind of a reliable source of information rather than having to just seek this out on an individual level.
How freaking cool is that, Sam? I mean, it really is. It's such a holistic, like, as a data scientist, like this hub, this data integration hub, multiple factors that are impacting these people's lives. It sounds like a really fantastic tool.
Yeah, especially that social aspect. I mean, I feel like that can't be overstated with conditions like diabetes and especially type 1 diabetes. Like I can absolutely see how that would be helpful to have a community of people like working alongside you to implement these management techniques.
And, before I talked about how there are grifters out there, this is like the anti-grift.
Right.
Like, to me, this is such an incredible tool that is so necessary for people living with this condition. And I love that with your background, you're approaching this scientifically. You're really focusing on the, I'm going to say variables that will have the largest impact on quality of life and such. So this is really cool. Has this been like years in the making?
Yeah. So, I mean, the idea it's built up from frustrations of, it's really that goes back to that thing about all of these decisions that are required for somebody living with type 1 diabetes. When you think of the impact of different intensities and types of exercise, with the timing of your previous meal, with nutrition, that sort of stuff, and the solutions that exist are just merely collect more data. With this, what we want to do is integrate all of the data together, contextualize it in a way which is easy to understand, and enable a clearer conversation with your doctor as well, who previously didn't have any of this contextualized information. So if you're regularly exercising, put on the table how important exercise is for you to have that conversation with your healthcare professional, with your endo, so that you can really figure out strategies that work. And that's really what we want to do.
This is not collecting data for data's sake. This is turning data into meaningful information. This is incredible. Nicely done, Sam. Where can people learn more about Enhanced? Are you on social media or follow the work that you're doing? Can you let us know how we can learn more?
Yeah, so the app itself is available on the app stores. It's Enhanced-D, Enhanced. You can also find our website, www.enhanced-D.com. People can find me on Instagram or something like that. But we also are very, very keen to have feedback on the way that this is developed. We have multiple early tester groups. We have published as well online all of the features that we have planned, and it gives a very clear outline into what features are in production, what we are going to put out, and people have the ability to kind of upvote or even provide suggestions about what's there. If somebody wants to copy this, they can, but I can tell you it's really difficult to do. But it's really, really important that we're building something that is actually solving a problem, and it's not just placing what we assume that people would want. So if there's anybody who's interested in using it, please download it and just kind of see that it's something that is being improved kind of week on week.
I'm texting my sister-in-law right now. She's living with type 1 diabetes, and I think she's actually talked about needing something like this. So we will happily spread the word. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing, Sam, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. We really appreciate having you. And thank you all for tuning in. We hope you learned a thing or two. I absolutely did. Please join us next week on your trusted source for no nonsense, just science.